Good morning, Professor Otis. My name is Rebecca Witt. Here's the paper. Rebecca Witt, today's date is August 22nd, 2021. As you can see, my choice for coordination and control of digestion regulation is the gastric phase, which is really the increased secretion and motility of the food in the stomach going to the last phase. But first, we need to understand that the digestion is under the enteric nervous system, which is a large division of the peripheral nervous system. It can control the behavior independently from our central or CNS input, like it almost has its own brain. There are also 3 phases, as you can see to the, I guess is that my left or your right? Well, to my left is this phallic phase, meaning the head. This phase relates to the sight, smell, thoughts, and taste of food. The salivary glands you can see over here. The sublingual, submandible, and parotid produce about 1/3 of the gastric secretion. It also initiates this long reflex that continues when you get to the gastric phase. Of course, the second one is what we're going to be talking about in the coming slides. It's where the bolus is created. It's where the bolus is created in the cephalic phase and enters the stomach, and it causes distension. And then we're going to talk about what happens after that. So then lastly, of course, intestinal phase where the duodenum in responses to the arriving chyme, and it's going to finish its completion going through the body and out the butt or the anus. Okay, so distension in the vagal control. In the gastric phase, distension or stretching activates the vasovagal reflex, which activates an afferent pathway, which in turn stimulates the efferent response in the dorsal nucleus of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is in the medulla, signals acid secretion. 2/3 of the secretion happen in this gastric phase. The secretion comes from different cells in the stomach, which we're going to take a look at next. And here is our main slide, because it's going to have your typical gastric gland. As you look at it, you can see there's a pit, there's the neck, there's the base, and off to the side, these are labeled and kind of like the mucus cell glands, the alkaline mucus, the parietal cells and what they produce, chief cells and what they produce, and the G cells. So the lumen of the stomach is lined with a mucus-producing epithelial and gastric pits. As you can see, one is right here, over here, and over here. And multiple cells produce these gastric acid and some enzymes as well as hormones. The G cells which produce gastrin is very important in the acid release, which also act on the parietal and chief cells. Gastric release can also decrease when the pH lowers to 3. Since gastrin's primary function is to promote acid release, it does this by acting on the parietal cells and indirectly on histamine release. The parietal pumps H+ from the H2O by the H+, K+ H base into the stomach in exchange for potassium. Now what this does is result in hydrochloric acid or gastric acid entering into the lumen, lowering the stomach's pH. Its function is to activate pepsin, the enzyme that digests protein, as well as denaturing some proteins on its own, and it kills bacteria and bad microorganisms. Also, again, creating a very acidic pH. Pepsin and gastrin activates. Pepsin that gastrin activates is part of 2 enzymes secreted by the stomach, pepsin and lipase. The pepsin is released through the chief cells of the enteric nervous system in a short reflex. It carries out the digestion of proteins. Lipase is also co-secreted with pepsin. It breaks down triglycerides. But before moving on, I do want you to take a look at how the histology slide on the side is really beautiful. It shows you that it is exactly like a pit, and it kind of shows you where the chief cells are, the parietal cells, and things like that. And in this slide, this is kind of like the summary slide, but I want to talk about, before reviewing it, I want to talk about the paracrine secretions, like that of histamine. They're secreted by the ECL cells in response to acetylchloric acid, no, acetylcholine and gastrin stimulation. So we talk about the gastric phase and its functions. You're going to be able to see that its functions are to enhance secretion, start in this Phallic phase, homogenize and acidify chyme, initiate digestion of the proteins and by pepsin. It only lasts about 3 to 4 hours. I mean, in the intestinal phase, there's a lot longer duration. The mechanisms are going to be neural, hormonal, and local. The neural reflexes are short reflexes triggered by the stimulation of stretch receptors when the stomach fills up, stimulation by chemoreceptors when the pH increases. The hormonal is the stimulation of gastrin released by G cells through the parasympathetic activity and the presence of peptides and amino acids in the chyme. And then local release of histamine by the mast cells as the stomach fills, like we just talked about, histamine. And the actions increase acid and pepsin production and increase motility and initiation of mixing waves to create that chyme that's going to go into the duodenum, into the small intestines, which is the last phase. So anyways, I think that's all for the gastric phase of digestion. I hope that it was informational. Thank you.